from the Salvation Army National Headquarters, this is the Fight for Good podcast.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fight for Good podcast. I'm your host, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Foley. We're recording here in our temporary studios at National Headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. And to my left is my editorial director and friend, Mr. Jeff McDonald.
Greetings.
Good to see you again, sir.
It's great to be here.
We're always grateful to invade the offices of our illustrious producer, Elizabeth. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello there.
Good morning to you, and thank you for listening in today on this very special episode of the Fight for Good podcast. We today are focusing on one of our very significant leaders in this country, the territorial commissioners, the territorial commanders, and leaders of the Central Territory. In particular, Jeff, you had the opportunity to sit down and have a phone conversation, interview with Commissioner Heidi Bailey. How did that all go for you?
Very well. March being Women's History Month, we wanted to focus on women's role within the Salvation Army and Commissioner Bailey's perspective on what it means to be a woman in the world today. She is the Territorial Leader for Leader Development for the USA Central Territory, and as such, she works with both men and women. But from her experience, she's had extensive experience in women's ministries around both in the USA and overseas appointments, including South America and visits to India, etc. So in this article, in this interview, you'll hear her speak to some very contemporary topics in that she talks about the Army's viewpoint on women in ministry and how she goes about advising women on how to prepare for leadership roles and the advice she would give to young women about their role in the world.
It's a very interesting read, and there was a lot that she shared with you in the phone conversation, and you had to whittle it down a little bit for the copy, where the podcast allows us a little more of an opportunity to hear her from her voice and hear she's got an incredible passion for the Lord and for the ministry of the Salvation Army. Her and her husband have had unique opportunities to serve the Army all over the world, and it's very exciting to see what they're doing together, and in particular how she is using this opportunity now in her life to mentor the next generation of leaders and to challenge the Salvation Army to think differently.
Yeah, she acknowledges that the Army, given that it has a long history, sometimes is slow to change, and she points out, as you'll hear in her very personable voice, how since females make up 51% of the world's population, why aren't they making up 51% of the world's leadership? So she says such things as that.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for that, and thank you for writing this wonderful article. And now let's listen to Commissioner Heidi Bailey.
So how were you introduced to the Army? I'm just curious.
Well, I'm actually third-generation Salvationist. So being born into the Salvation Army, I never really had the opportunity or experience of others who are attracted to it in some way and come later in life.
I see.
But having said that, here I am many, many years later, still in love with the Salvation Army's mission.
Yeah.
And I'm just really grateful for the opportunities that have been afforded to me over the years, first as a soldier, local officer, and of course now as a Salvation Army officer.
Kind of switching gears, can you explain for us the Salvation Army's viewpoint on women in ministry?
Well, that's a big question, and I'm sure there's many interpretations to it, but I have always felt that since its inception, the Salvation Army has been theologically clear regarding women in ministry and the inherent value of all people, the God-given dignity of both male and female. And I think this was so evident in its countercultural approach to women in ministry in the founding days of the Salvation Army in England. We were cutting edge. We were criticized, but we knew who we were and what God was calling us to, and that's always been really important to me as a woman in the Salvation Army. And I always felt that there was a place for me in my church, and that has stuck with me in some maybe difficult or discouraging moments, because I think somewhere along the line you might say that we lost our early gender equity focus a bit. But gratefully, the loud cries field for many years now are being heard, and the general is taking serious strides to restore what I think was painfully lost for women sometimes in the Salvation Army. So God's viewpoint on women in ministry has never changed, which keeps us grounded and pulls us back if we need to regroup and try to move forward a little bit quicker.
The Salvation Army, by necessity and on principle, was at the cutting edge of providing women with ministry opportunities, as you've said, and placing them in leadership. How is the Army doing today, and how can it do better?
Well, I think we're on the uprise with that, but it is a very slow process. I always say that women hold up 51% of the sky. So how about if we have 51% of our leadership be women? And we're at about 12 probably right now. So we've got our work cut out for us. And it's a delicate, sensitive topic, but it really shouldn't even be a topic. So this is why I think the cries from the field are being heard loudly. And, of course, if the general wants all of his officers available to him, everyone needs to be considered according to their gifts and validated for them, and thus appointed accordingly. So we've got some work to do, but women are patient, right? So we're being patient as we push.
Yeah. So as a leader of leader development for the Central Territory, how do you encourage women to prepare themselves for leadership roles?
Well, my appointment is actually for both men and women,
yes.
But I think we do that in different ways according to appointments, responsibility, gifting, and sometimes even gender. I always tell women, love God, love yourself, and love others, because I believe that accepting who God has made us as daughters of the King is really the most valuable preparation one can have in their leadership, because that releases you to be a kingdom builder. I often tell women that they are fearfully and wonderfully made, so don't compare. Don't compete. This is Satan's strategy to keep us really from growing God's kingdom, and it will only bring about low self-esteem, discouragement, depression, and eventually spiritual death. So we try to always remember that we are daughters of the King, and that's a pretty happy thought for us.
Well, that's powerful. I can see how the world impinges on that and why that could be a struggle. Okay, so switching gears again, what have you most appreciated about your service as a Salvation Army officer?
Well, I never could have imagined the life that I have had. I think I'm therefore most appreciative of such a large, varied platform which has been put before me from which to lead. I've served in the inner city. I've served in the suburbs. I've served in small corps and large corps. I've served in divisional headquarters, territorial headquarters, international headquarters, in developing countries, in Western countries other than the United States. And I mean, it's just so amazing and such a blessing, because each place has challenged me and rounded off a few more of my rough leadership edges and Heidi edges, if you will.
Well,
and
we all have those, right?
Have changed my heart. Yeah, I mean, the people change your heart and your ministry perspective, and that has happened much more than I ever could have imagined. And
wow.
so I'm just extremely grateful.
Yeah. Okay. So and also then on the flip side, what have you found discouraging in your officership?
I think sometimes I'm discouraged because I sense an unwillingness to change and adapt to today's realities, and I think that it's hindered the growth of the Salvation Army, which in and of itself is discouraging. But some say, and I think many people believe, that change equals compromise. And I don't think that is necessarily true, although it can be. Mm-hmm. Change around us happens without our permission. Societies change, cultures change, fashion change, and it's without our permission. But it's up to the church to respond to that change. And I think we can be relevant without selling our soul. We can find new ways to attract people without losing our identity. And as Salvationists, we can all help our Army regain any footing that we might have lost. If together we can let go of some sacred cows, if you will, for the good of the kingdom. So changing our mission is compromise, but changing us to fulfill our mission certainly is not.
Well, that's quite a statement. That's a very big topic. Can you give me an example of the kind of change you think should be considered?
Well, we have an awful lot of traditional things in the Salvation Army, whether that's our style of music, our form of worship, mm-hmm. or our programs, the activities that we do. And I think all of those things can be looked at based on the neighborhood and culture and community that you find yourself in. Certainly an inner city corps will look different than a suburban corps. Our overseas appointments, our corps look different. Although there still was a very strong British influence that was still there from many, many, many years ago. But, we can start by offering, I guess, a little bit of everyone's taste in worship. We do that at my home corps. They'll have a traditional band and songsters that are very large and very good and very committed. We mm-hmm. have a lovely praise group as well that helps us in worship every Sunday. And then just a plethora of children's activities who may participate as well in the meeting. We do everything in 2 languages at my corps because of the place where we are located. That's a real commitment, and some people are not interested in that, quite frankly, because they don't speak that other language. And so you have to know who you are and where you're headed, and that is something that chorus felt like was not a compromise. That was complementing the mission in that neighborhood. So I think it's really tailor-made and custom-made according to where you are. But I think the common denominator is an open heart and open mind to know your community and to try to respond in the best way to meet the most needs.
It is encouraging to see what the Army is doing in multicultural ministry. With Korean corps and Spanish corps, et cetera. I think there's a lot of reason for hope there. But what are your hopes for the role of women in the Army in the years and decades ahead? Probably that you wouldn't have to ask me that question ever again. But but we're not quite there yet. So I mentioned that women hold up 51% of the sky, so how about 51% of our leaders being capable women who might not have been considered yet? But actually, we are all equal at the foot of the cross, and my hope is that all Salvation Army officers would be considered from that perspective, not male or female, but a child of the King. No woman wants a position just because she's a woman. That is demeaning and invalid, and makes us want to say, no, thank you, we're not interested. But women do want to be selected for an appointment if they are the best person for that appointment. And that goes for local officership positions. That goes for employee opportunities. But you have to be considered first with your gifts, and you have to be validated by your leaders before that can happen. So, I think that would be my hope, that we, as we move into a less gender-specific time, most of our young people, they don't really want to go to a men's conference or a women's conference. They want to all go together. Right.
They're not interested in dividing, and they just want to be seen as people. And I think we can learn from that. There'll always be activities for everyone, adults, children, men, women. But when you're considering leadership, just look at us all the same and cover up our names at the top of our resumes and pick the best person. That's what we want.
Yeah. I'm gaining a new appreciation for the Apostle Paul, and you referred to him, and so many of his thoughts are, parallel what you're expressing. The Army's internationalism is a wonderful feature. In Christ there is no east or west, in him no north or south. And also the idea of equality under the gospel, within the gospel.
Yep.
And of course, Paul has been misinterpreted and misapplied, but certainly, Jesus himself was no respecter of persons in a sense. So that's certainly something we should strive for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus was the greatest, supporter of women, and very countercultural, very going against the grain, but always so value into women's lives. He realized and recognized that they were the last at the cross and the first at the tomb, and he recognized the value of the daughters of the King.
Right. So what have you found to work best in bringing people into God's kingdom?
Being yourself is a good start, and then making sure that you develop or that you exude an authenticity and a transparency. And remember that it's all about relationships. I think those first two qualities produce the third, if you will. If you're authentic and transparent, you will find relationship building easier and more fruitful. And so I think that's that in a nutshell.
Yeah. So I'll ask you one more question, and I'm sure we can go on and on, but I do want to ask you, what advice do you give young women about how to find their place in the world?
Well, I'm looking at a piece of word art that I have here in my office that says, I want every girl to know that her voice can change the world. I want every woman to know that she does not need permission from anyone to stand tall and be all that God has created her to be. That might not be popular with everyone, as we've spoken of, with societal pressures and cultural pressures, but we aren't called to be popular. We're called to be obedient. So I always encourage our women to continue encouraging each other as sisters in Christ, no matter where someone else is on their journey, no matter what their situation is. We need each other as women to hold up our 51% of the sky.
That was Commissioner Heidi Bailey. Well, Jeff, as always, I'd like to ask you this question. What was a couple of your takeaways from your time spent with Commissioner?
Her down-to-earth attitude, her emphasis on authenticity in relationships, and her desire to instill confidence in women and for women to find their voice in their culture and contribute. And you get a sense of the humbleness she feels when she sees women around the globe, making significant changes in their families and their cultures by just basic changes in how they, whether it be a micro enterprise function they're doing, or participating in a group activity through women's ministries, how they are being empowered to bring a positive impact on their world.
Well, I like what she says on page 17 here. There's a comment that she said, together, if we can let go of some sacred cows for the good of the kingdom, we can regain some footing we have lost. Changing our mission is compromise, but changing us to fulfill our mission is not. Now, that's a tweetable quote right there.
Yeah.
And that's a power-packed comment.
It is, and that's what you get from her, that the mission is so dear to her that that's what she wants to serve. in her advocacy for change.
Well, we in the Salvation Army believe in women's right to preach. We also need to do more to allow women to step up into traditional male roles in behind the scenes sort of works, and we're seeing more of that. I think there's a little bit more intentionality of it. We're not all the way there yet, but I got the feeling when you talk to her, she's hopeful for the future. She's hopeful that these changes will come about and is not going unheeded.
Our international leader, she points out, the pedals are actively engaged in dealing with this issue of equality within the Army. So she's very hopeful in that regard, and she participates on the committee that is discussing that topic.
Well, we're grateful for your interview with her. We're also grateful to Commissioner Heidi for taking the time with us. And it's not always it's not easy to be vulnerable. And she was very vulnerable with you and very open. And we appreciate her candor.
I do, and I also appreciate her attention to us. I mean, she was very careful in helping us make sure that we interpreted, we captured what her message is.
Well, we hope you have enjoyed that interview with Commissioner Heidi Bailey as we celebrate Women's History Month, the month of March, and continue to realize that the Salvation Army has a significant place for women around the globe in ministry opportunities. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Fight for Good podcast. We hope that you will continue to listen to many future podcasts that we have. So make sure you subscribe. If you don't know how to subscribe to podcasts, you can go to our website at thewarcry.org, and we have instructions there how you can subscribe. And our listenership is growing, and we thank you for being a faithful listener. And make sure that you subscribe to wherever you listen to these podcasts on. And don't forget to follow The War Cry and Peer Magazine on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. Well, until next time, this has been the Fight for Good podcast. We thank you for listening. God bless you.
Subscribe to Fight for Good wherever you listen to podcasts.